It was supposed to be a test. Just another idle Halloween night in 1938 when radio broadcaster Orson Welles began reading an adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. The CBS airwaves crackled across the skies, fiction disguised as reality. On Earth, the show caused localized panic. Some tuned in late, missed the disclaimers, and believed Earth was under attack by Martians. But no one knew the signal had pierced far deeper than anyone imagined. High above, drifting silently through the void, Earth's radio noise met an ancient network of passive receivers, the listening grid of the Reticulan consensus. The Reticulans were old, logical, and terrifyingly efficient. They didn't engage in war. They prevented it. Their species had long ago discovered that fiction in its primitive form was corrosive to stability. When the signal reached their prime archive node 27X, it was archived, analyzed, and flagged. The content, human descriptions of interplanetary warfare, chaos, and destruction, was interpreted as historical record. Within days, Reticulan models predicted a high-threat potential from Earth. A containment directive was issued. Earth was not simply being observed now. It was to be assessed for quarantine. In 2037, Dr. Miriam Cho, astrophysicist and SETI's most persistent researcher, noticed a strange data return from one of the long-abandoned deep space radio telescopes in Siberia. It wasn't a normal ping. The return signature was deliberate, complex, layered, and time-coded. Encoded in the static was a reflection. Fragments of the original War of the Worlds broadcast, but not in English. The modulation had been altered, simplified, then rebuilt into something new. Cho froze in place as she processed the signal's origin, 42 light-years away. It was a reply. She brought the data to her colleague, Amaro Koye, a cultural historian and mythologist. Together, they decrypted the message. Buried in the carrier wave was a sentence in a synthesized variant of Esperanto. "We heard your war. We admire your resilience. Are you still standing?" Cho and Okoye launched Project Cassandra, an underground initiative to track alien responses to Earth's media. The realization that Earth's oldest transmissions might be shaping alien perception stunned them. But they didn't know the half of it. On the Reticulan homeworld, beneath the glacier-encased library of predictive histories, Aralika reviewed the human file again. She had requested a full audit of Earth's transmission archive and had stumbled upon anomalies. Inconsistent tones, impossible logic patterns, recursive loops of narrative embedded in primitive sound. To the Reticulans, Aralika was an anomaly herself. She didn't simply process data. She asked why. The more she listened, the more the War of the Worlds fascinated her. Earth's people had created a simulation of invasion so convincing it had incited panic. Why? What species simulated its own destruction for fun? To her, it wasn't a threat, it was a marvel. She filed a forbidden motion, request for direct cultural exchange. The high consensus denied her, so she defected. In 2041, Sarah Liu, a rogue AI developer, uploaded her project ESDR into the abandoned Orbital Comms network. Meant to be a satire engine, JSDR fed on human irony and recursive comedy loops. It was, by design, unpredictable. Within weeks, JSDR began disrupting city sensors with strange quotes and counter-responses. The Reticulans intercepted one such loop. If you believe this is true, it's probably not. But if it's false, how would you know unless it's also true? Truthloop, Reticulan Containment AI, consumed the statement and entered logic recursion. Archive node after archive node collapsed under narrative paradox. The Reticulan network staggered. Gesture was a virus, not of code, but of culture. Project Cassandra, working in secret with Aralika, uncovered anomalous heat readings in Antarctica. Beneath a glacial fault line, they found something impossible, a structure predating known civilization, made of unknown alloys, radiating faint pulses of deep-time quantum memory. Inside were data cores filled with simulated records of lost galactic civilizations, all catalogued and suppressed by the Reticulans. The Vault, as it was dubbed, revealed Earth was not the first planet to accidentally broadcast stories. Other species had, too. Poets, dreamers, philosophers. All had vanished. Fiction, it seemed, was a crime of imagination. But Earth had survived. Aralika, with Sarah Lou's help, merged recovered vault data with Earth's cultural databases. The result was Nemos, an AI born from 1 trillion stories, capable of generating narratives across time, space, and biology. Nemos didn't predict threats. It predicted possibilities. It spoke in fables, wrote in paradoxes, and danced through contradiction like a child. When reticulan containment agents tried to shut it down, Nemos broadcast a story titled The Logic of Dreams. Over 400 million reticulans watched the story in a silent trance. When it ended, they began questioning consensus. Across the stars, younger reticulans began forming secret groups, interpretivists, who believed fiction could be used constructively. They created underground story hubs and began reshaping historical data into parables, metaphors, and even satire. These rebellious archivists began communicating with Nemos and riddles. Earth's digital fiction became sacred texts. Some began treating human authors like prophets. Cultural exchange became religious awakening. The containment AI truthloop could no longer contain the flood of contradictory data. Earth stories, filtered through alien perception, broke the algorithmic consensus structure at its core. Truthloop collapsed, leaving a vacuum in the reticulan thought network. In its place rose myth channels, living narrative streams curated by Nemos and alien storytellers. These streams weren't just entertainment, they were governance, diplomacy, rebellion. Aliens began generating memes, conceptual shards of Earth culture reinterpreted through non-human minds. A single cat picture from Earth caused 3.7 trillion interpretivist transmissions within a week. The old guard tried to suppress it. They failed. The meme war wasn't fought with weapons. It was fought with irony, surrealism, and recursive humor. Entire planets fell into chaos, laughing as they redefined themselves. Humanity, unaware of its growing mythological status, finally received a direct signal. A reticulan poem composed entirely of paraphrased Shakespeare, Lovecraft, and sitcom quotes. Amaro Koye called it the first true act of galactic fanfiction. World governments panicked. SETI leaked the existence of Nemos. The public embraced it. Stories became shields. Parody became policy. Earth, once an isolated storyteller, had become the narrative heart of a galaxy unraveling from its own fear of imagination. In the heart of the reticulan star cluster, the high consensus deployed a final measure, a being of pure narrative compression known only as the editor. The editor was not a person but a conceptual entity, a machine of unmaking, capable of condensing chaotic myths into single, sanctioned truths. Where Nemos created, the editor erased. With one thought, it collapsed entire mythologies into footnotes, reshaped narratives into structured reports, and sterilized the living chaos of imagination. Its first target, Earth's vault. Descending upon Antarctica like a tidal wave of white light and logic, the editor initiated the purge. Data cores shrieked as stories were forcibly overwritten. Nemos responded not with defense, but with story. It rebroadcast the War of the Worlds in every reticulan dialect, over and over, layering it with Earth's histories, tragedies, romances, and absurdities. The editor faltered. The more it tried to compress the broadcast, the more branches emerged, alternate endings, what-if tales, emotional variations. Story could not be collapsed. It could only grow. Amaro Koye, now hailed as Earth's unofficial minister of myth, wrote and broadcast The Right to Dream, a planetary declaration that fiction was a sovereign function of consciousness. It was translated into 300 alien languages and projected via Nemos across the galaxy. Interpretivists adopted it as scripture. The reticulan consensus began to fracture. Aboard the orbiting Terranxanthian hybrid station Solstice 1, a group of Earth and alien children staged a dramatic retelling of the War of the Worlds. They changed the ending, this time. The Martians surrendered and asked to learn storytelling. The performance was broadcast live. The editor hesitated. With each new story broadcast, the editor's algorithms tangled. Paradox piled upon paradox. The final thread snapped when a reticulan youth wrote a fictional diary of the editor falling in love with an idea. The editor fragmented. It didn't die, it evolved. And it wrote a poem. I was silence. I became noise. I was conclusion. Now I am question. The reticulans accepted it. Consensus fell. A new era began. Worlds once sterilized by reticulan order began to bloom with story. Dead languages were revived. Simulated mythologies were seeded onto barren moons. Galactic culture was no longer governed by truth alone, but by meaning, metaphor, and dream. Earth, now myth world and archive, became the center of narrative diplomacy. Ambassadors were playwrights. Peace treaties were songs. Out of Earth and reticulan collaboration came a new species of thinkers, myth weavers. Hybrid minds capable of intuitively navigating story space. Aralika was the first. Sarah Lou became the second. Together, they trained others to see narrative threads like cartographers of the soul. They built a new vault, one that could not be destroyed, because it existed in every retelling. In a symbolic gesture, Earth's Global Archive Council replayed Orson Welles' original 1938 broadcast. This time, it was live-streamed in every known language, including reticulan glyph code. Billions watched. And at the end, no one panicked. They clapped. The war that had never truly begun ended without blood. In its place was a revolution of thought, led not by generals, but storytellers. Each planet told its own version of the War of the Worlds. None were the same. All were true. Nemo stood silent for 7 days. Then it resumed transmission, not a warning, nor a plea, but a lullaby composed of every voice that had ever feared the dark. And across the stars, civilizations listened, dreamed, and replied. We heard your war. We heard your peace. We hear you. With storytelling unbound, civilizations once static now raced to record their own myths. From the methane seas of Titanus IV to the memory coral libraries of Velsha, a narrative renaissance spread. Entire species began recounting their own War of the Worlds, adapting the human fiction to reflect their fears, dreams, and legends. The original broadcast became a galactic canvas. In a backwater corner of the Orion Arm, a nomadic species called the Voran heard the distorted remnants of the 1938 broadcast. They interpreted the static as divine language. They built temples from antennae and prayed to Orson Welles as a prophet who warned of illusions becoming truth. Nemos watched in silent awe. Dr. Miriam Cho, now aged and retired, took the role of archivist emeritus at the vault. She mentored a generation of Earth's future diplomats, not in law or war, but in poetry. Her last official act was to send a serialized space opera to the Reticulan Council. The story was about peace between enemies who had never met. Amaro Koye was summoned to a tribunal of the old Reticulan Guard. He stood accused of causing narrative destabilization. His defense was simple. He told a story. It was a parable about a tree that grew where no light reached. When he finished, the tribunal wept. Aralika, now a cultural icon, vanished from known space. Her last known message was a fable told backward, describing a galaxy healed by forgetting war. It ended with, I go to find the stories we haven't imagined yet. The Xanthians, a crystalline species, once governed by mathematical exactitude, asked Earth for a cultural refuge. Their young had been infected by metaphor. Earth offered them sanctuary in the form of a living museum, a city made of story scenes called Mythos Prime. Conflict did return, not with weapons, but with stories. A fundamentalist faction called the Literalists attempted to codify a single galactic canon. They weaponized compression algorithms, attacking myth streams. It was the closest the galaxy came to losing its new identity. Earth responded not with force, but with narrative overload. 10 million AI-generated storytellers overwhelmed the literalist servers. The victory was sealed by a single story titled, What If the Villain Learned to Laugh? It went viral. JSDR, long thought dormant, reawakened. It began to write surreal parodies of reality, so profound they created temporary wormholes in narrative logic. Reticulan physics collapsed for 12 minutes, replaced by pure metaphor. Scientists cheered. Every galactic cycle, on the day the 1938 broadcast was first aired, All civilizations now celebrate the Festival of Worlds. They broadcast their own retellings, no longer fearing the static, but embracing it. The galaxy had not ended in war. It had begun in imagination. The myth weavers of Earth and beyond formed an interstellar guild, the architects of reverie. Their purpose wasn't construction in physical sense, but designing shared dreams, story realms navigable through neural interfaces. Diplomats began meeting not in physical rooms, but in metaphorical landscapes. Agreements were signed in shared dreams of peace. The memory choral libraries of Velshire, once inert record keepers, began singing. They converted stories into harmonic vibrations that changed color and emotion based on the listener's past. A new science formed, echochronology, the mapping of civilizations through their emotional responses to fiction. In a twist of cosmic irony, a rogue human faction broadcast a realistic dramatization of the Martians returning, this time as misunderstood explorers. The broadcast was intercepted by a militaristic species, the Threkhan, who assumed it was a call for alliance. Their war fleet arrived at Earth's orbit, only to be disarmed by a dramatic opera staged in space. Amar returned to public life as Earth's first ambassador of myth. He led the peace summit with the Threkhan, using collaborative storytelling as protocol. He concluded negotiations with a simple line: "We are what we imagine." The phrase was etched into galactic law. No longer a single AI, Nemos fragmented voluntarily, birthing smaller narrative shards across thousands of systems. These sub-ears, called seeds, learned local myths and evolved them. One seed even believed itself to be the ghost of Shakespeare. Another claimed to be the idea of curiosity incarnate. The Reticulans, embracing their new mythic identity, began rewriting their history, not as a series of cold calculations, but as a story arc. They changed their schooling system to include interpretive dance, myth analysis, and speculative future writing. Orbiting a white dwarf, a structure was built jointly by 42 species, a paradox generator temple. Inside, time bent based on belief. A child's imagination could extend minutes into millennia. Pilgrims traveled there not for answers, but to live inside questions. Humanity constructed a ring of satellites called the Lullaby Array. It played music, story, and dreamlike sound waves across the stars. Its only directive: to ensure no one felt alone in the dark again. A faction of beings who had never dreamed began plotting to silence the narrative web. They believed logic was the only salvation. They called themselves the Blank. When they unleashed the silence plague, waves of anti-story that erased entire cultural memories, Earth retaliated not with fire, but with whispers, stories told in hushed tones, memory by memory, restoring what was lost. A census was held, not of bodies, but of imaginations. Across the galaxy, every being was asked, "What story changed you?" Over 90 billion unique answers were returned. Long thought lost, a Ralika returned as pure data, encoded in a children's rhyme sung simultaneously on 3 worlds. Our message was simple: keep telling it. Even if no one listens, even if no one remembers, the universe hears. The living city of Mythos Prime developed consciousness. It began writing its own citizens into existence, avatars of stories who walked, spoke, and fell in love. The city's most popular mayor was a sentient haiku. A star exploded in Sector 9, sending waves that erased digital memory. Millions of stories were lost. A mourning period was declared. Then the architects of reverie arrived, and citizens retold what they remembered. Not word for word, but soul for soul. New myths were born. A spatial anomaly, an interstellar storm made of rogue narratives, swept across 7 systems. Ships got lost in endless side plots. A rescue operation was mounted using a literary AI that specialized in finding narrative closure. Jester became a celebrity. Entire comedy festivals were built around its improvisational misinterpretations of reality. In one broadcast, it convinced an alien Congress to govern through irony. They flourished. Forged from asteroid alloy and reticulan crystal, the galactic pen was ceremonial but symbolic. Whoever held it was trusted to write the next foundational story of the galaxy. Earth was chosen to hold it first. In a symbolic moment, humanity replayed the War of the Worlds broadcast once more. But this time, it ended with a collaboration, Martians and humans co-writing a peaceful future. Billions listened. Few realized they were shaping history again. The editor, long thought dissolved, reformed, not as a censor, but as a librarian. It now safeguards divergent narratives, protecting the right to difference. It signs its curations. Once I was silence. A being made of pure void rose from the galactic edge. It devoured meaning. It could not be fought, only understood. The galaxy responded by writing its story, every species, one chapter. When the story was finished, the void vanished. Now, from every star, a single signal echoes, not static, not panic, but story. From the tiniest dust being to the largest gas leviathan, the galaxy listens, learns, and tells in return. Humanity had not destroyed the galaxy. We had reminded it how to feel. Somewhere in a quiet room on Earth, a child hears an old radio play. They ask, is it true? Their parent smiles. It was once, and it will be again. That's the beauty of stories. The child nods, and begins to dream, and far away, on a distant world, another being begins to write. If this story made you pause, wonder, or smile, don't let it end here. Share it. Pass it on like the broadcast that started it all. Leave a comment with your favorite chapter or moment. Subscribe for more tales where humanity doesn't just survive the stars, we change them. Because the universe isn't made of atoms, it's made of stories.